Curious George discovers space. Are you curious about outer space? George is too. Come along and see what's happening at the Space Center. Professor Wiseman invited George and his friend, the man with the yellow hat, to visit her at the Space Center. Professor Einstein and Professor Pizza needed help, and she thought they might be able to lend a hand, or more than one as it turned out. How can we help? Asked the man. The scientists began to brief the man on his first mission, to restock the space station's food supply. The astronauts on the station discovered they had only one peanut left to eat. Did you know? The International Space Station is a spacecraft where astronauts live and do science experiments. The station is as big as a football field and orbits Earth. 6 people can live there at once. A very special thing about the space station is that people from many countries built it and work there together to keep it running. The man with the yellow hat was planning to ride a space shuttle up through Earth's atmosphere into space. He would enter orbit around Earth and pass near the space station in order to make his delivery. The man would get to experience weightlessness. How would you like to float inside a spaceship? Of course, George was disappointed he wouldn't be able to come along. Did you know that gravity is the force pulling all objects on the surface of a planet toward the center of that planet? It keeps us from floating off into space. Gravity is weaker the farther you are from the center of a planet. If you are far enough away, you are weightless and float. But in order for the man to release the supplies, he needed to be able to push 4 buttons at the same time. The man only had 2 hands. He couldn't do that, but a monkey could. George was thrilled to help. The hungry scientists on the space station would soon have more than one peanut to eat. George would also deliver some new supplies to help them with science experiments. You must launch the payload at exactly the right moment, Professor Einstein said to George. George nodded. He would have to listen to instructions carefully. Do you think that would be hard for one little monkey? Did you know that payload is another word for cargo? That means the materials that a vehicle is carrying. Liftoff was a success, but then George wanted to look at the supplies. He took them out to play, but he couldn't get them back inside quickly enough. George missed the payload launch. He passed right by the space station without sending the supplies. George would have to orbit Earth one more time. Did you know? To orbit the Earth means to follow a path in space around our planet. When the spaceship travels, it's like a tug-of-war between the force pulling the ship back down to Earth and the speed of the ship going forward. When the speed is just right, the ship can travel in a circle around the Earth forever. George, you have enough fuel for only one more orbit. You have to get the supplies back in their containers. The next time you pass the station will be the last chance. Then we have to bring you home, warned Professor Wiseman. George was used to cleaning his room. It was good practice for cleaning up the mess in the spaceship. He was ready in time to launch the supplies. Hooray! They made it to the space station. Did you know that George isn't the first monkey in space? Many different kinds of animals have been launched into space and returned safely to Earth. Monkeys, dogs, cats, turtles, butterflies, fish, rabbits, mice, spiders, and more. Studying animals in space helps scientists learn about living in a weightless environment. Did you know that to land the shuttle must make a change in direction, which slows the ship down so it falls back to Earth? The ship is coated with a material that can handle the heat created as the ship passes through the atmosphere at such a great speed. The shuttle has a special shape that helps cool it down and slow it down. It also uses a parachute to slow down safely once it is touched down on the ground. George had one more task to complete. He had to make it back to the ground safely. To do this, the shuttle had to re-enter Earth's atmosphere at the right moment. It was a good thing George listened to instructions this time. He pulled the lever that controlled the ship's direction. He could now land the ship back at the Space Center. His friends congratulated him on a successful mission. Did you know? NASA ended the Space Shuttle program in 2011. Now U.S. astronauts travel to the International Space Station aboard the Russian spacecraft Soyuz at a price of $70 million per ride. That's one expensive ticket. On to our next problem, said Professor Pizza. Once the shuttle mission was over, "We're having trouble with our Mars rover. The controls are getting stuck here at the Space Center. We are worried that when it actually lands on Mars, it will also get stuck on the rocks," added Professor Einstein. A Mars rover is a vehicle specially made for exploring the red planet and sending information back to Earth, the man explained. "They're testing the new rover here at the Space Center." Did you know Mars is the fourth planet in our solar system? It is smaller and lighter than Earth. Iron oxide, or rust, gives the soil a reddish color, which is why Mars is also known as the red planet. Scientists are interested in knowing all about our next-door neighbor and hope that someday people will be able to visit Mars. Would you like to visit Mars? Did you know that the first time we got a close-up look at Mars was in 1976? NASA sent two spacecraft called Viking 1 and Viking 2 to study the planet. These spacecraft sent back thousands of pictures of the surface and images from space. Scientists began to learn about the air on Mars and its rocks and terrain. Even though there have been many more missions to Mars, they are still studying the original Viking data. George thought the Mars rovers would be fun to drive, but he soon learned that they are operated by remote control only. Professor Einstein offered everyone a piece of chewing gum as he explained the sticky situation in the Space Control Center. "You know there's a no-gum rule in here, Einstein," said Professor Pizza. "Ah, you're right," said Professor Einstein. He opened a large metal drawer and threw his gum out. George was excited to see the launch of the latest Mars rover. He hoped they could figure out this problem together. They sat around a table to talk and plan. The man asked, "Since Mars has lower gravity than Earth, is it possible the problem wouldn't even happen there?" Professor Pizza agreed. "That's certainly possible. If the pull of Earth's gravity is causing the sticking, it might not stick in Mars's low gravity. With the lower gravity on Mars, you would be 3 times stronger there," said Professor Wiseman. "If the rover sticks, maybe we can get it going again by giving it a good push." George imagined how strong he would be on Mars. Did you know that the gravity on Mars is 38% of the gravity on Earth? That means that if you weigh 100 pounds on Earth, you would weigh 38 pounds on Mars. George wanted to help, but he was tired, and nothing puts a monkey to sleep like a lot of adults talking. The last thing George heard the man saying was, if only we could send someone to Mars to push it. George fell fast asleep. He dreamed he was going to be the first monkey headed to Mars. Did you know there have been 4 Mars rovers sent to explore the surface of Mars? NASA scientists develop and test the rovers here first. Then they send the vehicles by themselves to explore the surface of the red planet. The rovers do experiments on rock samples and send the information back to Earth. The Mars rovers helped scientists learn that there is water in the form of ice on Mars. We hope the rovers will also tell us if life exists there now, or did in the past. In his dream, Professor Wiseman told him, "It's an important mission, George. If the rover sticks, your job is to give it a good push." The man was going on the space mission with George. How lucky! George wouldn't be lonely on his trip. When the ship finally landed on Mars, George was sitting on top of the Mars rover. When it was released, he went with it. The rover bounced along the surface of the red planet. George was on a runaway vehicle. Did you know it currently takes 8 months for a spaceship to reach Mars, which is Earth's closest neighboring planet? It takes only a few days to reach the moon. Which would you rather explore? Did you know that Valles Marineris is more than 2,500 miles, 4,000 kilometers long? That's almost the length of the United States. The canyon is 120 miles, 200 kilometers wide, and up to 23,000 feet, 7 kilometers deep. Lucky for George, he found the remote that controlled the rover. He was able to slow down the rover. Phew! He also had a book about the Mars terrain. Now he could explore Mars. George rolled up to a very deep, very wide valley that looked like the Grand Canyon, only much larger. The book told him it was called the Valles Marineris. George also found the Olympus Mons, the highest volcano in our solar system. It had a great view. He wished his friend could enjoy it too. At least George could see where his rocket had landed. He began to drive the rover back toward the spaceship. Olympus Mons. Did you know The Olympus Mons is 16 miles, 25 kilometers high, 3 times the height of Mount Everest. It is one of the many volcanoes on Mars that erupted for millions of years but are no longer active. Did you know that names of the Mars rovers have been Sojourner, which means traveler, Opportunity, Spirit, and Curiosity? Isn't Curiosity a good name for a Mars rover for George? What would you name your own Mars rover? But that's when the rover got stuck. George opened a panel and discovered great big globs of green gum were clogging up the controls. No wonder it kept sticking. Luckily, in the low gravity of Mars, George was able to use his super strength to pick up the vehicle and carry it back to the ship. That was when George woke up from his dream. Now he knew why the real Mars rover was getting stuck. He led the scientists back to the control room and pointed out a gummed-up panel. Professor Einstein had been using the rover control system as a trash bin by accident. Oops, the professor said. Do you think the Mars rover was able to launch after all? After the control panel had been cleaned, of course. It's a good thing monkeys are dreamers, the man said. George agreed. He had many dreams, as big as the one about traveling to Mars. Next stop, Pluto.